Thank you very much for being here. Great to see you all for this press briefing, with organized by EIPA, Europe-Israel Press Association, with Professor Rabi, Uzi Rabi from the Moshe Dayan Center of Tel Aviv University. Before we start, of course, Professor Rabi already met each of one of you, but maybe just a reminder to introduce yourself, so for everyone knows who is here. Please.
Alex Barker from the Financial.
Karen Kudak from Geopolitical.
German Gladstone, American freelance. Yeah, I've got the Hungarian public media.
Tomislav Krasnis from Croatian newspaper, Večernji.
Elise Kulcham from the ECR at the European Parliament.
David Price, Brum Communications. I write on a column called Your Democracy and works on Truman.
Okay, thank you. So first, let me briefly give you some introduction, some words about EIPA. EIPA is an organization that was established almost 3 years ago. It's an independent body. It has nothing to do with the government in Israel, of course, or elsewhere. It's completely independent. And the objective of the organization still is to help as a tool. It's a tool for journalists to help them better understand the complexities of Israel and the broader Middle East. I think that there is a lot of to say about it, and journalists need information. They need tools to better understand this, and that's why we are here. So we are here to help journalists, and we are here to help you. Mainly what we do is organizing press trips to Israel. We have done already about 5 press trips. We are doing it once more in this month, at the end of the month, just after the Israeli elections. We organize press briefing like here today, not only in Brussels but also in Paris. Professor Rabi was yesterday in Paris. He spoke to the Fondation de la Recherche Stratégique, and also he met some of your French colleagues. And we also do it also in Berlin, and soon also in London. So we are here for you, so please feel free to contact us if you need also people, contacts in Israel. We help on a regular basis to have a good spokesperson, but also people from academics or experts in various fields. So now I will give the floor to Professor Rabi. Professor Rabi is, as I said, director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. He's also a senior researcher at the Center for Iranian Studies, also at the Tel Aviv University. And his research mainly focuses on the modern history and evolution of states and societies in the Middle East, Iranian-Arab relations. Professor Rabi is an expert on Iran. Also about politics in the Middle East and Sunni Shia dynamics. He frequently provides expertise and also commentaries and analysis to a number of international media, also national in Israel media, and also Arab language media, because Professor Rabi speaks Arabic. So he has also published a series of very interesting studies on the topics. So I will leave now the floor to Professor Rabi for a presentation, like 25-30 minutes, and then you will be able to ask him the questions. It's open, and I think this meeting is also very timely because we are just 2 days after Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the Congress on Iran. We are a few days also before the Israeli elections, general elections, 17th of March, and also a deadline on P5+1 Iran talks end of this month. So I think Professor Rabi has a lot to tell and a lot to answer also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See, thanks everybody. Good morning. I mean, it's a real pleasure to be here today and just to share with you some of the thoughts and the insights we do have in our research center, my observations about the Iranian conduct in the Middle East and the nuclear file. So let me just start with some observations. I think that could be the best thing I could do. Just use these 20 minutes for coming up with some observations, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A discussion or whatever. First of all, I mean, while looking at Iran and trying to measure or to have a say about the way Iran is conducting its activity in the region in the recent 2 years, or let's say since the mid 2013, when Rouhani came to power or became president, I think that Iran has internalized almost fully the deep changes in the region. So it is kind of a conventional wisdom. What we have in the Middle East is a totally different reality. Our notions, not only about Iran, but about every state in the Middle East, even the superpowers' activity, says loud and clear that many of the thoughts and the insights that were used by us in the 20th century are not valid anymore. So basically what we are trying to do is just to arrange for a set of understandings, of keys to understand the way the Middle East is being run these days. It is a totally different opera. Now, Iran has internalized that. As you know, Iran actually has been unique in two main things when it comes to its foreign policy. The first of which is, of course, the nuclear file or the nuclear issue. This is something that I'll just stick to some main notes, and then, of course, we could just further develop that. First of all, for Iranians, nuclear ability is not only a geopolitical tool, it is also kind of an indication by which to show and to indicate how advanced Iran is when it comes to technology, when it comes to science. So basically, our discipline comes not only from, or lies not only on the geopolitical lens. What we are trying to do is just to understand geopolitics through history. And basically, this is something that we should know. Of course, I guess that you are familiar with it, but Iran is unique also in the Middle East geopolitical panorama, not because it's a Persian, Shi'i, because it was an empire, and many Iranians do feel, while actually comparing themselves to the others in the Middle East, as what they call in Persian Tamaddun Bozorg, which is a high civilization. So basically, nukes is something that most Iranians, including the moderate ones, would like to see in order to put some teeth into the basic notion of how civilized, progress, advanced Iran is. Geopolitically, that goes without saying. If Iran goes nuclear, that would bolster its regional posture or position. Two main examples that are to be found always in front of Iran's eyes: Libya of Gaddafi and Ukraine. Those who neglected the nuclear ability paid the price. So basically what Iran sees in front of its eyes is the nukes as something with which you are getting more and more in unity for your politics of survival. If somebody has a thinking of attacking Iran, militarily speaking, or any other way, if you are a nuclear player, it would give the other some second thought or some food for thought. When it comes to the Middle East, nuclear ability would make Iran stand vis-a-vis Israel, mano a mano, with the Arab states inside getting weaker. And what Iran actually has in mind is kind of, I would say, strategy with which to dominate the region, thanks to its being a nuclear player. So I don't think that nukes is going actually to make or to become kind of a tool by which to destroy the Middle East, but to have some levels of influence, to make sure that Arab states are going to follow the Iranian request or demand when it comes to international forums, when it comes to OPEC, when it comes to everything. By the way, what I'm saying now is sort of a conventional wisdom when it comes to states like Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, Jordan, and others. The simple fact that Iran is going nuclear makes them actually lose some sleep on that, because they know that this is a game change phenomenon, geopolitically speaking. It would change the game. So this is the game. How the Iranians are trying to do that or to achieve what I'm trying to say, this is something that we have to make sure we understand. Looking at the map, of course, make sure that you know that while Rouhani and Javad Zarif are coming up with their charm offensive and dealing with the 5+1 about the term of the deal, at the same time, actually, General Qasem Soleimani and others are just bolstering Iran's position in 4 Arab capital cities. It started from Beirut and Damascus in the 80s. But after 2003, actually, the gates of paradise were opened for Iran, because the most important state in Iran's foreign policy, Iraq, where the majority Shia came to power thanks to the Americans. Well, this is in Middle Eastern terms kind of a hit of construction. For Iran, this paved the way for Baghdad and Basra. Pasdaran, Revolutionary Guards actually brought in a lot of activists there. They have the armed militias, which is run by Muqtada al-Sadr there. And basically what Iran has is kind of a real stronghold in Iraq. There is no Iraq anymore, but I'll use the term Iraq in order to just make sure that we are on the same page, because when it comes to Baghdad to Basra, well, we have 60% of the Iraqi population Shiites. Most of them actually are being, I won't say under the authority of Iran, but Iran has many soft penetration tools there, economy, armed militias, as I said before, and politically speaking, they have some good working relations with the Shi'i government of Iraq. You can add to that what happened in Yemen in the recent weeks. Sana'a was taken also captive by Al-Houth family, Zaydis, Shiites, who are being supported by Iran. And this is, of course, part and parcel of what I call going on in the Middle East. This is the Sunni-Shi'i kaleidoscope, or Sunni-Shi'i fierce rivalry. So basically, we do not understand geopolitics in the Middle East anymore in terms of nations and states. Why? Because some of the states are not there anymore. There is no Syria, there is no Iraq. Lebanon is on the ring, and Jordan is in a very bad situation. States like Libya and Yemen are not there anymore. What we are trying to just understand is how the whole game is being played. It is basically along the line of what we call primordial identities. So if we, for example, actually are going to understand kind of a group, a camp, a bunch of individuals in Aleppo, Homs, Mosul, whatever. The simple fact, actually, or the simple question is who you are, and not to be answered in nationalistic or statial terms. What we would like to understand, whether they are Sunnis or Shiites, the Druze, Kurd, Turkish, Turk, or whatever. So Alawites, and you can go on. Basically, this is kind of a fascinating game. We have a totally different Middle East, and I think that Iran actually has, as I said before, has internalized that. Just to quote Ali Jafari, the commander of the Pasdaran, actually saying that once we have now 4 capital cities, Arab capital cities, under our influence and authority almost, there is no question about who should lead the Muslim communities in the Middle East or the Middle East at large. This is basically what Iran has in mind since 1979 when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. One of the main things actually that he brought in was the what they call in Persian Sudur and Galab, which is the exportation of the revolution. This was not a revolution that was to confine itself to the Iranian perimeter. And basically what they tried to do, the revolutionary guards, is just to find out some weak links or and try actually to capitalize on that. This is Hezbollah in Lebanon, Al-Assad family in Syria, Shiites in Iraq, Houthi family in Yemen. They of course have some representatives, so to speak, in North Africa. Basically, this is a penny for a rainy day. These are levers of influence. They don't want to create a Shiite empire, but they understand that skillfully, if you have kind of a Shi'i bridgehead and you are going to capitalize on that, you are going to do 2 things. First of all, to Shiitize states like Lebanon, as was happened from 82 to 2006. And second, of course, have a proxy on the other side of the region that could harass, in that case, Israel, which is something that is very, very instrumental in better delivering the message of the revolution. So try to think of Iran before dealing with the nuclear negotiations as kind of a player that is being equipped with many other instruments that could be definitely implemented while negotiating. So Iran is not threatening the West, but Iran does understand that everybody knows that they could fund the flame in no time, in very sensitive areas in what we call the Fertile Crescent. Now let's talk about the deal which is being dealt with these days. So there's a lot of things to say about that, but I'll just be very, very brief on that. But when it comes to the Q's and A's, I guess that we can just further elaborate on that. First of all, just make sure that we know Iranian opposition realizes too that what is being dealt with, Natanz, Arak, Fordo, is what we call the declared sides. To differentiate or to make sure or to emphasize that there are undeclared sides. So you don't have to be much of an expert to understand that concealing enrichment activity is much easier than concealing a nuclear reactor. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a half-baked cake, this deal. Why? Because what we are dealing with is what we know, not what we don't know, the undeclared side. And there are 3 elements there that should be dealt with. The military dimensions of the whole program, research and development, and of course the missile or ballistic dimension of this whole thing. We know about Parchin. We definitely know about some other sites. This is something that is not being brought to the table, and that is part of the problem. if I would like to come up with kind of a bottom line saying, I would say that a good deal is a deal where Iran is getting a total removal of the sanctions regime, which is, by the way, kind of a thing that even Ayatollah Ali Khamenei would be very eager to have. But in return for that, what the 5+1 or the world should get is what I call complete transparency. That is the only deal that could be considered a good deal. Otherwise, any deal is just something that goes in line with the Iranian strategy, which means relaxation or sort of a lull in the coming years, economic prosperity that would enable the Ayatollahs to widen up their basis of legitimacy and prevent the possibility of an Iranian Spring. And then, if behind what was left is kind of attainable or kind of a considerable amount of nuclear activity, enrichment, they would dictate the rhythm and they would decide actually when and where to turn it into a military program. That is the strategy. So basically, Israel, and you know it's not Netanyahu. If you ask actually Herzog, for example, he would say the same. What they are debating about is whether actually Netanyahu should have spoken at this stage before the elections, because it is a political debate. So this speech, actually, you could have an issue about the way Israel is expressing its reservations. I agree. I do not fully agree with Israel all the way when it comes to Iran. But I would definitely fully agree with the basic conclusion that says that a deal under the terms that we do hear and know is a bad deal. And this is why I think that Israel and the Middle East should take into consideration that Iran is going nuclear, and sooner or later this is something we're going to get. And this would definitely dictate a different rhythm to the geopolitical game in the Middle East. Of course, it has some other ramifications. Saudi Arabia and its sisters, Jordan and others, would demand, and they would get, sort of a nuclear umbrella or protection, which is going to be implemented by the West. And of course, take into consideration that Iran is highly needed these days for the United States. The Iranians know that. The great miracle is the emergence of ISIS. ISIS actually has changed the rhythm in the Middle East, of course, and made the Americans and some of the Europeans actually look at Iran as the lesser evil. Once you are the lesser evil, and once you are a shrewd diplomat, as the Iranians are, you can definitely actually use that for what I would say kind of turning the tide or becoming kind of a very viable player to be quoted almost by everybody. And this is exactly what the Iranians know. Now, in Iran, what I could tell is, you know, Rouhani and Zarif, we understand that. This is what is being depicted in the West as Sham offensive. But Rouhani actually has to deliver. In his campaign, he didn't mention Iran, nuclear activity. He didn't mention Israel. In contrast to Ahmadinejad, yes, his predecessor. What Rouhani came up with is a sharp promise for the young population of Iran to bring in some prosperity when it comes to the economy, job opportunities, welfare state, whatever. So basically what Rouhani is of the opinion is that they should just do whatever they can in order to just conclude a deal, because this is something that has to be there, and something that would help out in delivering the message that was promised before the election. Khamenei, well, that is more difficult. Khamenei is well committed to the military elites in Iran. There's the Bastaran and Basij, who have sort of an iron grip of the economy. These guys, for two reasons, would like to see actually this whole thing being hampered. The first thing is economy. They would like actually to have Russia and China in the game, not Europe and United States. The second thing is that there are some circles within the Pasdaran or the Basij who do think that an agreement is sort of something that heralds normalization with the United States or with the West, something that stands against the very tenets of the Islamic Revolution. Khamenei is trying to, I would say, have sort of a middle course where this deal could be achieved here, but without actually being seen as somebody who gave up on even one of the main messages of the Islamic Revolution. That's the game. So there is an inner debate in Iran. I think that Khamenei came to understand that a deal is highly needed because even when it comes to the nukes, it would make Iran life easier. So to become actually a nuclear player with a deal is much easier rather than without a deal. Again, a deal would actually bolster your economic position, your legitimacy within the society, within Iran. And basically, as I said before, Iran can definitely assume that there are, I would say, some sides to be left behind that would create sort of a very good point of departure if and when they would like actually to turn the program from civilian nature to a military one. So I think that I'll stop here if I may, and just
Open the floor.
yeah, please.
Please.
I just had a question about the total transparency of the deal. What do you mean by that? Feel like that works?
I mean by that there would be no off-limit sites for international inspector. So international inspector would have the ability to search whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Otherwise, you know, how can I see that? Rouhani himself actually said that if you are going to just show some moderation, we are going to provide, and I'm quoting, greater transparency. What is greater transparency? Transparency is either or. This is how I take it. And I think that if we can get full transparency, and Israel is not, of course, a player in this negotiations. And what Israel should know is that it is expected to abide by its terms. And what Khamenei knows that in case of a deal, a military Israeli attack on Iran is out of the scope. It's undoable, basically. Israel won't actually act against the whole world. So this is another reason why they should have a deal. Well, Israel is trying to make the most of it in the time that was left here. But if you ask me what is full transparency, this is full transparency. No off-limit sites for international inspectors. Just like that. Sorry, no chances. No chances. No chances.
Do you know what level of discussion is there in the talks about that? I mean, how much is that dominated?
I don't think that, I mean, what I am amazed by is that the public discourse, the word transparency is almost absent, let alone full transparency. And I think that, again, what they are dealing with is the declared sides, as I said before. And basically, since the Iranians are much better negotiators than anybody else, by the way, not only the Americans, anybody else. I see kind of a game which is very, very sophisticated. Within it, there is the bad cop and the good cop, Rouhani and Khamenei. I would imagine that Ayatollah Khamenei and Rouhani are on the same page, but they have different roles when it comes to negotiation, and this is why I said good cop, bad cop. But if I would be Rouhani, I would to say, and I would pretty loud and clear actually offer the Americans or ask them not to send me back to Tehran empty-handed, because that would bolster the, let's say, extremists there, their position and their stance. And they would say, haven't we told you that? Something like that. And here is another thing which is a misconception of the West, in my opinion. Of course, that's my own observation. The notion behind the eagerness for a deal is kind of an assumption that once there is a deal, Iran would become a much more moderate and friendly state when it comes to the West and the United States, and would become sort of a partner by which to stabilize the realities or the reality in the Middle East. I'm pretty sure that this is something, because I mean, we could just listen to the nuances when it comes to Obama, Kerry, and others. Iran is being taken as, Iran after the deal, as kind of a viable partner with which, for example, to suffocate ISIS. Now, Iran won't suffocate ISIS. Iran needs ISIS, but Iran needs ISIS with a curtailed power. So as long as you're going to hit them, they're going to stay here, because they send a message that, or what is left behind is, as I said before, Iran is the lesser evil. So if somebody thinks that Iran is going to side with the West in order to stabilize the Middle East, Iran has its own agenda. They're going to have come up with kind of a functional cooperation only if their interest is going to be met by yours, not else. And as we know, actually, it's a very complicated issue, so we have to let it go in that. Yes, please.
Could you say something about the other dimension, which is part of the policy, which is the oil and Hormuz? Iran seemed to have freed up its relations with Egypt before Mubarak fell, and now there's ships coming through the canal into the Mediterranean, which is a bit closer to home here. How does the...
Well, oil is a very tricky issue here, because, you know, the slump in the prices makes Iran losing a lot of money, because it's well below the break-even price. I think that Iran would really, really like to have, you know, the sanctions regime being removed, to see Siemens, Nestle, Citroën, whatever, actually be brought into Tehran. But I think that part of the missing items that I see in that deal is oil. I would bring it in. This is something which is very painful for Iran, and I would use it one way or the other. The Saudis are, you know, willing to accept this price level of $50 per barrel, or 50 plus, because it gives them two main advantages. The first of which is this is a damage to Iranian economy, and for the Saudis, the fiercest rivals of the Iranians, that is kind of a good news. The second thing is that once you have that oil at that kind of a level, this is something that I would say call off the incentives of others to look for alternatives for oil. Because at that prices or that level of prices level, I mean, you would be willing to buy oil, and that could go on. I think that what Iran is trying to do is just, they don't have an oil strategy, which is pretty clear here. They have a lot of problems with the sanctions. Oil is part and parcel of their economy. What they are trying actually to have a deal for is exactly that, to diversify the basis of economy away from oil. So in other words, to have kind of an economy that it not heavily depends on oil production and oil prices. What they are doing with the ships in the canal and stuff like that, well, this is Iran actually. Once they are having internalized that there could be a problem here, and that the Saudi Arabia has kind of a very harsh grip on that, and they are committed to that for the Americans and Europeans, but at the same time they like the idea of Iran being damaged economically. What Iran is doing is just to bypass and just find some other, let us say, alternative incomes and alternative sources with which to better its activity when it comes to the gas and the oil activity. I would make sure that this oil policy is being maintained there. This is kind of a thing by which to pressurize Iran. And I'm not sure that there is kind of a, let's say, real cooperation when it comes to OPEC politics or OPEC, let us say, dynamics that could create sort of a belt of pressure on Iran on that. But as things actually are being looked at least by me now, this is kind of a hit. This is kind of a real damage to Iran. And they are eager to have something that would serve as a game-change phenomenon to change it, because this is something that, with the passage of time, could really kill them, I mean, politically and economy. And as I said before, this would create for the Ayatollahs kind of a replica of the Arab Spring that could be seen in Iran. And as we saw in 2009, the Green Movement or the Green Revolution, basically this is a spring. This was a spring. The problem is that in Iran there is no opposition. And when it comes again to Pasdaran, to Basij, they hold actually the economic and the military force or amount of power that would suppress any let us say, attempt to just change or to promote regime change in Iran. This is what they have in mind, and I think that, I would further elaborate on that, because I know how sensitive Iran is when it comes to this oil thing, and I know how much they are creative and eager to find some alternative sources, and but they do identify here a real construction or a real problem that should be dealt with sooner or later. But again, this is part of the deal, and this is why I think Iran is eager to have a deal. I think that there would be a deal because both sides, for different reasons, are eager to have kind of a deal being concluded.
And the delivery systems for the West, with a great Prophet #8 exercise, which shows they can close these straits.
All the more reason, definitely. I think that, this is kind of another this is kind of another item or dimension of what we are trying to say here. Iran, what I think we learned actually in the recent year when it comes not only to Rouhani but also to Khamenei, and this is something that he is trying actually to persuade by that, the Pasdaran and the Basij and others. If we are not going actually to have a healthy economy, we are doomed. In the long run, with 80 million people in Iran, with still actually, I would say, pockets of poverty in the suburbs of Tehran, in others, Esfahan, and other parts of Iran, this is something that is going to be very, very, I would say, very, very instrumental in Iran's future survival. Islamic Republic. Take into account that in Iran, 40 million are Persian, the others are not Persian. So if you are going to look at Iran socio-demographically, you would have Azeris, Turkmens, Baluchis, and others. Each one of these communities could be taken kind of a Trojan horse being used by others. I won't delve into too many details about that, but you should understand that if somebody would like to hit Iran, they definitely know actually where they are weak. What they are doing to others in Lebanon and Syria could be easily done to them. And they know it. And this, alliance of minorities or whatever, Turkmens, Balochis, Azeris, and others are totally, at the bottom line, they are half of the population. So basically, it's a very sensitive, socio-demographically speaking, and of course economically speaking, a sensitive situation. What I'm trying to say is that Iran does respond. Iran does understand what I'm saying. And this is why they are so proactive in some other arenas in the Middle East and out of the Middle East. And this is why actually ISIS is being taken by Iran as something that, if being used in a smart way, could really actually bring Iran into the, let us say, global economy, could be concluded in kind of a deal, and so on and so forth.
Next question.
Sir, I want to ask about regarding IS
Yes.
in current situation. According to my information, the first leader of IS was Abu Musab Zarqawi,
Yeah.
who was Jordanian guy. and-
Palestinian living in Jordan. Yeah.
Who attended in Afghanistan with Osama, and afterwards he shifted to Iraq and he started over there.
Exactly.
And or the beheading and cutting the human body
It was there
parts.
before.
It was, he started it.
Yeah.
So, and he fought against Bashar al-Assad in Syria,
Yes.
and
And against King
It
Abdullah
was-
in Jordan.
King Abdullah in Jordan. And also, this is against the Iranian benefits of that region. Because
Definitely.
Iran was supporting Bashar al-Assad, and he was fighting against the interest of Iran.
Definitely.
And so this could be, IS could be a byproduct of Saudi investment and American interest.
Yeah, well, that's very, very interesting what you say. I think it's it's
Just let me complete one
Okay,
sentence more.
please.
That IS could be, the threat of IS could be a same level towards Israel and towards Iran.
In what
What I
sense?
think, in all senses, that IS is a threat over there that has the same level towards Israel and same level towards Iran. So why not you
First of
declare
all-
a
first of
common
all,
enemy? to
I don't
IS?
rule out the possibility of that kind of a thinking, because as we said before, we have changed the keys totally. Let's just talk about IS with regard to Iran. Basically, you are right. ISIS is a former Al-Qaeda in Iraq, okay? The founder there is a guy that comes from a Jordanian city called Zarqa. He was a Palestinian in origin, Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. And this guy actually in the 90s got the ability to, or the approval from Bin Laden to create there kind of a unit which was called in Arabic Jund al-Sham, which means actually the Sham is the Islamic name of Syria, or Buldan al-Sham, the let us say Greater Syria army. Greater Syria is Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and Syria. In that sense, this is a Sham. Jund al-Sham is kind of an army that was created or established in Afghanistan, with the approval of bin Laden and was headed by Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. This army was shifted to Iraq before the Americans actually invaded and toppled Saddam Hussein. So after the Saddam Hussein was toppled, this Al-Qaeda in Iraq became kind of a group that is being headed by Zarqawi under the authority of Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden. Okay, now, can we just have the Iraq thing? Okay.
Just
Now, let me state just to show you that again. Yeah, you look at Iraq. Okay, this is the Shiite portion. This is the Kurdish portion. This is the desert and the Sunni portion, or Sunni tribe, so to speak. The Americans were here, and basically, since 2003, what was created in the Middle East is a precedent. The Americans toppled Saddam Hussein, a Sunni, which was to ruled Iraq. And in the stead of Saddam Hussein, we got a Shiite government which is running an Arab state. This is unheard of in the Middle East. No Arab states had been run by Shiites. So basically, the Americans, with good intentions of course, thought that it is high time for toppling Saddam, who is not only a cruel and barbaric ruler, but also actually a minority in a state where the Shiites are majority. So the logic actually says that if we are going to let the Shiites rule, since they are the majority, they're going to be much more generous than Saddam and less anxious about their political survival. What happened is that Sunnis, mainly, Kurds too, but mainly Sunnis, were haunted by Shiites in the aftermath of 2003. Now, to understand actually what was to give birth to a phenomenon like ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Iran is to understand that Iraq in tandem provided two belts of hostility that Al-Qaeda is being inspired of: West, Americans, and Shia. So you know that Iran is the fiercest rival of ISIS. This is the most extremist Shi'i creed or presence in Iran, and of course ISIS or Al-Qaeda is the most Puritan Sunni performance. So basically in Iraq you got the peak of the Sunni Shi'i conflict. And this is of no surprise that Al-Qaeda, later on ISIS, was to be given birth in Iraq. So basically, if you ask me, the ongoing harassment of Sunnis in Iraq by the Shiites who came to rule under the authority of the Americans was to provide kind of a momentum to the notion of it doesn't matter who is going to be our patron, as long as he is anti-Shia and anti-American. This is what the Sunnis have in mind. So basically what you got here is kind of a nucleus, anti-Shia, anti-American, and many Sunni tribes were in favor of ISIS because they took them as kind of a patron. The same could go for that. See that? This is Syria, a bunch of minorities. So once you have Bashar al-Assad still here, this is Lebanon, this is the Alawite section. If you look at the Sunni majority in Syria, and the Sunni minority in Iraq, what was created on both sides of the border is kind of a Sunni caliphate under ISIS, where Sunnis that were in sort of acrimonious relationships with both Baghdad and Damascus were to actually support, of course, ISIS. Now, Saudi Arabia supported ISIS because they were taken, or Al-Qaeda in the beginning, as kind of a tool by which to curtail Iranian influence. They didn't know that ISIS is going for Mecca and Medina too, not only for Tehran.
Obviously.
So this is what happened, yeah. So it's definitely there.
Please.
Yes, please.
You mentioned that there is no real opposition in Iran, within Iran. What about the remnants of the Mujahideen Park and their exiled organization, or any other formations? Is the problem that they are active on the outside?
Yeah, mainly. I fully agree with you. Listen, what we know about the undeclared sites is a lot of information coming from Mujahideen, Khalq, and others, and basically we would have known nothing about Parchin and Fardo without them. So they are just coming up with new discoveries, so to speak. But what I meant to say is that there is no formal opposition in Iran. If you take, for example, what happened in Egypt before the toppling of Mubarak, so those young people who were gathering in Tahrir Square, they were supported by already existing opposition to Mubarak, Muslim Brothers, for example, and others, or Nasserists and others. You don't have these auxiliary wheels in Iran, and you have seen that in 2009, because the protest of the Green Revolution was there, but without any support coming from any other formal organization in Iran. So they were easily smashed by the Basij and the Pasdaran. Having said that, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that the sensitivity of the regime, in line of considering what's going on in the Middle East, is getting higher. And they know that if in the long run they are not going to come up with some good performance when it comes to the socio-economic fold, they could actually, get sort of a scenario that one way or the other is similar to the Arab Spring, maybe Iranian Spring or something like that. And by the way, Iran is a state where revolution in the 200 years is a most familiar phenomenon. So basically we are talking about a public that at a certain stage could definitely, this is what history tells, come up with kind of a real, I would say, action by which to change the realities, if and when, of course. Yes, please.
Could you stitch together the two parts of your initial talk? How is the activity playing into the talks, or is it at all, in terms of Iran's activity in the region, and how would that activity, do you imagine, change post a deal of some sort?
Before I came to here, we had in Tel Aviv University kind of a game, war game. But there was also a game about the negotiating table. And I happened to play the role of Rouhani and Khamenei. I can tell you what I just, I would have told the Americans two main things. And I'm pretty sure that the Iranians are, time and again, emphasizing that thing. First of all, as I said before, don't send us back empty-handed. we would have nothing to say to the Basij, Pasdaran, Khamenei and others, because they have told us that it would come to nothing. So they would say something like, haven't we told you that? The second thing that they are doing, and they do it deliberately because this works. I see that in the other side of the road. There are many Westerners who argue that a deal would make Iran a different state. These are those who think that with the nomination of Rouhani, Iran has changed. Now, we have here a real debate, whether it's a strategical change or just a tactical change. I won't delve into that, but we should remind ourselves that Rouhani is just a president. Khamenei is what they call in Persian Rahbar. Rahbar is the supreme leader. And by the way, he would decide in the end of the day whether to conclude a deal or not.
But there were reports saying he is seriously, very seriously
ill. Well, I know that, and this had been said almost, I think, 10 and 15 years ago too. But, I tend to say that, Ayatollahs basically, even if Khamenei is going to pass away, I don't know. I mean, listen, it's an Islamic republic. Instead of Khamenei, there would be another Ayatollah Osman, of course. So the system is going actually to act as what they call in Persian Jamhuriya Islami, which is an Islamic republic. What is very, very interesting is to understand that Rouhani and Zarif are civil servants. They are actually diplomats who were chosen or elected at this stage to run the show. By the way, here is another observation. If you're going to ask Rouhani, and he was asked by the 5+1, whether there could be a link or a linkage between what I said in the beginning and the other part. How about let the deal also include kind of a thing by which to get out of Golan Heights. They are trying to do that here now. I mean the Syrian Golan Heights. Get out of Lebanon, make sure or help us out in just stabilizing things there. What Rouhani actually said loud and clear, I'm not allowed to talk about that. You know why? Because this is an ultimate file under the authority of the Revolutionary Guards. If you would like to change the Iranian modus operandi there, you should talk to Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani is the commander of the Quds Jerusalem force of the Revolutionary Guards. So I think that you are right while trying to find out actually how things are being merged here. I think that the Iranians implicitly using that in order to say something like, as I said before, we can fund the flame in no time, but we won't do that because we are getting closer to a deal. And if you take all these, you could understand why actually the West is that eager and the Americans to have, I think, a deal. And again, this is my observation, this is my take. I think that when it comes to the Obama administration, it has been said before, Obama from the beginning was wrapped up by people who were of the opinion that Iran is a pivotal player in the Middle East. And you cannot actually do great things in the Middle East if you don't have Iran on your side. If you would like to have an indication to that, go to the Cairo speech of Obama. It was stated clearly there that Iran should be negotiated and talked to, because Iran was taken as kind of a, I would say, stabilizing force fait accompli. And if we are going actually to have with them sort of a cooperation, this would be the recipe for a more stable Middle East. So You see, it's kind of a very, very tough game because it is diplomacy, it is negotiations. Now, I'll tell you something that is beyond the scope of academia. Iranians, Persians are very, very shrewd and skillful diplomats. It is part of their life. Well, I can tell you that because I'm Persian too. Half Persian. I'm half Iraqi, half Persian. So I can tell you that too. I mean, you know, in Israel they say, oh, these Persians, don't make business with them. Basically, this is something that, you know, if you look at this state, 3 millennia, they have 13 to 14 immediate neighbors. How much diplomacy you're gonna accumulate, experience, if you have that kind of a record? Think of that. And basically I admire them. They happen to be actually rivals of Israel for several reasons, yeah. But basically they know how to do diplomacy. And this is why actually I would warn everybody actually to pay attention to the hidden agenda of the Iranians, because they always have that, and they have the whole picture. And the simple fact that they have managed to change Ahmadinejad to Rouhani and to come up with kind of a much more complicated strategy, which has different two hands. You know, nobody talks about Soleimani, nobody talks about the massacre in Qusair, nobody talks, I mean, this was a massacre. It was a genocide. A chemical weapons actually was used there in order to massacre Syrians. Just like that. So I would take it with a kind of a grain of salt actually when it comes to a more, I would say, you know, there are some generalizations. Let's have a deal, it would change the reality. Well, the change is a relative notion, and we have to just be very, very accurate about it, yeah.
And back to President Obama, when you hear him saying that there is no viable alternative to a deal, not even military strikes would accomplish anything, and that, what do you think of that?
You know, I think that the military strike these days is not only very difficult, I think it's impossible.
But is there a viable alternative to such deal?
You know, if you didn't strike militarily, when there were people who said that this is the time, you know, in Israel we have many that were of the opinion that it's not the time to strike. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there is kind of what Prime Minister Barak called it, immunity time. I mean, there is kind of a strip of time span when you are still immune, so to speak. Now, all these people say it's too late. So there is no other alternative. There is other alternative, I just said it before. Full transparency. And if not, we are going to suffocate you economically. You would like to be, you would like to recuperate economically? We are with you. You would like us to come there? We are with you. You would like the economic gates open? We are with you. Full transparency. Complete transparency. We don't want to hear something like, here you cannot do that because it would damage the honor of the Persian community or the Iranian state. No. If you do mean business, let's go again. Let's go ahead.
What about full transparency of Israel's nuclear weapons program?
Well, I have the impression that neither Saudi Arabia nor other Arab states actually had that kind of a rejection when it comes to Israeli nukes. They are doing that now with the possibility of Iranian nukes. Well, I think that this is also something that Iran has managed to persuade everybody with, you know, to get, as I said, mano a mano with Israel. There is Israel, there is Iran, two poles in this Middle East. Arab states are getting weaker, and they could be crashed and smashed. I mean, this, I said that before. Actually, this is the Arab narrative. If you are going through Saudi press, I can send you that. So this is not what Israel says. This is what the Saudis said, what the Egyptians said, the Jordanians said, the Kuwaitis said. Okay? And this is kind of an op-ed, a columnist. Most of these columnists are pretty well known, and the notion is pretty clear. What Iran is trying to do while becoming nuclear is to become hegemon in the Middle East, just to put some teeth into that, and to better its politics of survival. Now, frankly, I don't think that it is something that we can do. We can prevent that now. I don't think so. I would advise my policymakers in Israel, when I'm being asked, that Israel should prepare itself to a Middle East with a nuclear Iran, sooner or later. Now, if you would like to strip Israel of its nuclear capacity, well, I would say that you could have had that maybe before the Arab Spring. But many Israelis actually are looking at their neighbors. What is going on there is that the leader of the state is slaughtering its own people with chemical weapons. Well, we had dreams about peace 20 years ago. No Israeli thinks about peace anymore, even not Tzipi Livni or whatever. What we are trying to do is just to get agreement that would strengthen our security zone or security sphere. This is it. This is the Middle East. Israel won't do that. I think that I can say that. Because, you know, we are living in a state or in a region. We are just 7 million. Around us, there is a hell. A hell. We are not party to the war. It's Muslims versus Muslims. But the scenes and the atrocities are well learned by Israel. We cannot afford ourselves in this neighborhood to lag behind, just like that. And I'm not being ashamed to say that. In that neighborhood, we have no other state other than Israel. This is the only state Jews have in the world. We cannot take risk about that. And this is why I say that for Israel, this is part and parcel of its modus operandi. To be technologically one step ahead from its neighbors. Otherwise, we are doomed. Again, don't take this as kind of a final conclusion. I think that Israel should talk to Palestinians, the right Palestinians, to have an agreement. I think that Israel should do whatever it can in order actually to pacify strips when it is when we have that. But listen, this is something for decades what's going on here. Nobody can deal with that. And nobody would get into the deserts of Syria and Iraq. We are done with that. And even Europe that tried to do that. You know what is that? This is a British program that from the beginning argued that Sunnis and Shiites, Kurds and Arabs, Kurds are not Arabs of course, and Persians are not Arabs, and Persians are not Kurds, could live together. February 1921, Sir Arnold Wilson, the High Commissioner, British High Commissioner in Baghdad, is getting a letter from London, and one of the clerks, the Foreign Office said, or asked, what if? A month before the declaration of Iraq, independent Iraq? What if Sunnis would go for Shiites or vice versa? Kurds for Arabs, vice versa. You know, I've been making a career on the response coming from Baghdad to it. That won't happen. We shall teach them to let bygone be bygone. This was the answer. So this is a different region. There are no states anymore. No Syria, no Iraq. We have Sunnis versus Shiites. We have minorities striving for their autonomy. We should, first of all, learn what we have in the Middle East. I'll show you that, but because this is our observation. I don't want you to take a picture of that, please, now. But this is the new map. No states. Or you would like states, you have Shiistan, Kurdistan, Alawistan, Little Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, Daesh. You have different layers here. So I would ask, you know, ourselves, first of all, and I respect your notion and your query, and I do think that there's a lot to say about that. But it has been changing so dramatically that many of the things that you just mentioned now, with all respect, belong to the 20th century. You have to live in the Middle East to understand that no Israeli would accept that. We are a tiny state. We are wrapped up with a belt of hostilities that has to do with us and has nothing to do with us. You see that? If we would like to have Israel better its politics of survival, we cannot give up on our technological advance or technological priorities or whatever. This is what I think. Sorry for that, but by the way, I would tell you that 90%, maybe 95% of the Israelis would agree with me on that. 95, maybe 95 of the Israeli Jews. Okay, let's put it that way.
Could I ask you about the level of expertise for nuclear affairs in Iran? And specifically, to give you a little bit of background, is that in Europe, after the war, we had the problem of nuclear proliferation. Even Switzerland wanted a nuclear bomb, and Germany did too. And we had something called Euratom, which Schuman created, which was a non-proliferation treaty, which had transparency as its core, but has not really succeeded because of politicians. But part of that is a transparency system and democratic of double-use technologies. Exports would come into it. So the level of Iranian technology expertise, native, and not A.Q. Khan borrowed technology, where does it come in relation to capabilities?
I'm not sure that we're going to have the replica of that in the Middle East, because I think that what we're going to have here is simply what I call arms race. And if if Iran is going nuclear, and that let's go with that scenario, the first thing Saudi Arabia would like to have, is kind of an umbrella of protection or something like that. And you know, even just to quote these Saudis, they already said that basically they are going to just, ask, I don't know if you accept that, but they mentioned that the Pakistanis actually to ship a bomb actually to Riyadh in order to just make sure that they are not lagging behind. So I'm pretty sure that if you would like to, let's say, try to find out what we're going to have thereafter, I wouldn't use the example you just gave me, because it would be handled in a different rhythm, basically. And we'll have to wait and see, because let us say anti-Iranian, pro-Western actors would like to have kind of an answer on how they are going to be protected if and when Iran is going nuclear. So I wouldn't go that line. I think that, and I agree with you, this is something that we have to think of. But I think that the Middle East would create sort of another formula there.
But I'm interested in how much technology from the West Iran needs in order to continue the
Not
program.
too much, not too much. Iran is very, very close. It's a matter of months. But in order actually to turn the fissile material into a bomb, but we know, as I said before, that this is a decision to be taken by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and basically what he can do is just to extend the time span, because Iran is, I would say, gleaning some advantages while being on the threshold to becoming kind of a nuclear state.